Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Diptarup Ghosh Dasidar and I am an assistant professor in the Amity School of Languages, Amity University, Chhattisgarh. And today we are going to discuss Prospice by Robert Browning. So before this, we have already discussed Browning as a poet and his relationship with Tennyson and his time. And we have also discussed a poem by Robert Browning, which is My Last Duchess, in which we talked about the psychology of a pathologically disturbed person. And we also said how there are such similar characters throughout the oeuvre of Robert Browning, like Porphyria's lover. However, in this poem, we are going to discuss something else because Prospice is not a dramatic monologue. Prospice is actually just a soliloquy. I'll talk about soliloquy soon, but if not a soliloquy, then a simple poem in which a person is sharing his thoughts. And these are passionate thoughts. It is a personal thought that you can find in this poem. And this poem is very deeply rooted in the life of Browning itself. So let's not further make any more deviations and get into the background of the poem. So we know that in 1842, Browning wrote dramatic lyrics, and in dramatic lyrics, we find poems like Porphyria's Lover, Pied Piper of Hamelin, My Last Duchess. But in 1842, it was quite earlier in his life. He married Elizabeth Barrett Browning, but it did not last long because Elizabeth Barrett Browning passed away in 1861. So in 1861, he lost his wife. Death of Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And he lost his wife, and this led to a period of grief. And it was in this year, 1861, that he wrote the poem Prospice. Prospice was written as a response, as a reaction to the death of his beloved wife. And it was published a little bit later in 1864. Initially in the Atlantic Monthly, and then in another of his anthologies called Men and Women. It was published in these two places, but finally it found place in a collection, in an anthology, which has very similar poems like Prospice, and that is also in 1864. It is called Dramatis Personae. So, Dramatis Personae is usually a list of characters that are mentioned before an Elizabethan stage play begins. Dramatis Personae. So, the characters in the play. So this entire volume of poetry, it works like a play in which there are different characters, and each of these poems is about these characters, these various characters. Prospice is about a character who is mourning and who wants to go and battle with death, and then finally reach someone who is beyond death, someone whom death has taken away. So there is a sense of loss, a sense of longing, a sense of pining in this poem, Prospice. So before we go into the poem itself, let's understand what is the verse structure in which this poem has been written and what is the meaning of Prospice itself. So Prospice is Latin. I'll just write it down over here, that Prospice is Latin for look forward to. So if you look forward to something in Latin, you would say Prospice. All right. And Browning, Tennyson, they depended on these classical languages, these classical stories a lot. So in Latin it says look forward to, and the structure in which this poem is written is very different from all the other poems of Browning, because in this poem we find alternative lines. So I'll just write the first few lines, not the first line itself, but I'll write the lines down from the second line to the fourth line. So it goes something like, when the snows begin and the blasts denote. When the snows begin and the blasts denote. The mist in my face comes before that. When the snows begin and the blasts denote, I am nearing the place. I am nearing the place. We'll scan these lines so that we can understand what kind of a verse structure it has. The power of the night. The power of the night. The press of the storm. The power of the night, the press of the storm, the post of the foe. The post of the foe. So here we have 4 lines of the poem. Now when we see these 4 lines directly, we can see that how the first and third lines are longer than the second and fourth lines. So the odd lines are longer than the even lines, and also how the structure maintains is that the first and third lines are exactly double of the second and fourth lines, and it goes on after that. So how is it double? We'll figure this out. So when the snows begin, when the without any accents, when the snows begin and the blasts denote. When the snow begins and the blast denotes, I am nearing the place. I am nearing the place. The power of the night. You see, power? No, power. The power of the night. The press of the storm. The post of the foe. So you see, this is a very interesting pattern in which a speed is maintained by alternating between anapaestic, iambic, anapaestic, iambic. So this structure, unstressed, unstressed, stress, is called anapaestic, as we have discussed in one of the videos before as well. And this structure is called iambic. So do watch the video in which we discussed about scansion so that you can understand everything that's happening here. So iambic, iambic, unaccent, unaccent, accent is anapaestic and iambic, anapaestic, iambic. So you see, and how many stresses are there in each line? 1, 2, 3, 4, and therefore this is a tetrameter line. But here, anapaestic, anapaestic, dimeter. There are only 2 stress marks. Again, iambic, anapaestic, iambic, anapaestic. You see, iambic, iambic, and here iambic, anapaestic. So you see, in the first and third lines you have 4 stress marks. In the second and fourth line you have 2 stress marks. So these 2 lines are in anapaestic tetrameter, because the majority would be anapaestic. The mood of the poem is not iambic, it is anapaestic. It has got a rhythm with it, and iambic meter usually does not have the kind of rhythm that a trochaic has or an anapaestic has. So it is an anapaestic tetrameter, and this is an anapaestic dimeter. So this poem, the verse structure of this poem is alternating lines of anapaestic tetrameter and anapaestic dimeter. So that is how the verse structure of this poem is. And now we have also known what the meaning of prospice is. So now let's just get into the poem and understand what exactly happens in this poem. So In the poem, there is a speaker, and this particular speaker is somehow extremely agitated and wants to do something. What does this person want to do? This person wants to go ahead and fight with death. He wants to go ahead and fight with death in a way that death will not be able to control him, but he will fight with death, maybe lose to death, but at least fight. And then there is someone on the other side that he wants to meet. So even if he wins, even if he wins the battle, he wins. Even if he loses the battle, he wins it. So it is more like a win-win situation where the person has given all his aspirations away and simply is out there for his love. So now we're going to go and discuss the poem in detail, in the sense that we'll go line by line and understand everything that the poet is trying to say, and we'll try to understand what exactly the poet thinks and why. So the first few lines, the poem starts with a question: fear death? So this question, like we have already said before, how this is not a dramatic monologue, but then there is a speaker in this poem. So who is speaking these lines? Who is asking this question? It may be the poet himself, or it may be a character whom the poet is impersonating. But the content is such, because it is written at such a time, that we are bound to believe that probably the poet is the speaker here. And the loss that he speaks about is the loss of his wife. So he asks the question, fear death? Do you fear death? Now, this might be a question to the reader, or this might be a question to himself. Fear death. And how does he explain the emotion behind death? How does he explain how death feels like to him? To feel the fog in my throat, the mist in my face. Now, see, after this, I'll show you how the lines are structured. We have discussed about the the verse structure and how that sounds in itself. It's a lot like, when the snows begin and the blast denote, I am nearing the place, the power of the night, the press of the storm, and the post of the foe, where he stands, the arc fear invisible form. Yet the strong man must go, for the journey is done, and the summit attained, and the barriers fall. So you see, there is a sense of urgency in which this poem is being spoken, and that is what denotes that something very serious is happening, something very hyped up, something which is not the usual course. Maybe there is an urgency in the mind of the poet or the speaker, or maybe there is an urgency in the actions that the speaker is going to do. So let's understand what these actions are, and how he looks at death. To feel the fog in my throat, the mist in my face. So death is like a fog in his throat. So a fog in the throat would mean that there is a difficulty in breathing, so there is a kind of a suffocation. The mist in my face, where you cannot see anything, so you cannot breathe, you cannot see. To feel the fog in my throat, the mist in my face, when the snows begin and the blasts denote, I am nearing the place. Now here we find a very interesting device, an extremely interesting device, and this device is used in many of his other poems as well. And the reason I personally like this device a lot is that it has been used in almost all the Elizabethan dramas. And the device is pathetic fallacy. So what is pathetic fallacy? Pathetic fallacy is a term which was coined by John Ruskin while he discussed or commented on some of the playwrights who came at this time and who came earlier as well. Pathetic fallacy is when the nature responds equally with what is happening in the soul of the main character. So if a person is angry, the nature would be tumultuous. If a person is calm, the nature would be calm. If a person is sad, it would be raining. If a person is happy, it would be windy. So something like this. The nature corresponds with the inner, the inner feelings of a character, or probably the protagonist. Now, John Ruskin talked about pathetic fallacy in volume 3 of his book Modern Painters, which was written in 1856. So in 1856 he talks about pathetic fallacy, and even when we discuss some other poems by Browning, we'll see how the pathetic fallacy works. For instance, here he's nearing a place, but how does he know that this place is actually that serious of a place? Because the snows have started, and because there is a storm bellowing somewhere, and the storm makes him feel that something serious is happening, that he has almost reached his destination, which is a dangerous place. What place is this? Fear death, to feel the fog in my throat, the mist in my face, when the snows begin and the blasts, so there are maybe volcanoes blasting, and the blasts denote I am nearing the place, he's coming close to the place. The power of the night, the press of the storm, the post of the foe. So this, you see, the power, press, post, there is a kind of an alliteration over here. And the power of the night is a time when evil forces come into play. Night is also, let's say, the night of the day would mean the end of the day, so very close to death, which is the end of life. So in a way, the night, the power of the night, could be associated to be a metaphor, maybe not. But the press of the storm, so the storm is going very strongly. The post of the foe, there is an enemy, he can see the enemy finally. So in this particular poem, there is a hero, that is a poet, the speaker, and there is an enemy, there is a foe. And that foe, who is that foe? That foe is death. The post of the foe, he has almost reached the place where the foe exists, where he stands. The arch fear in visible form. So what is death? Death is actually, many people have actually figured this out, that most things that we fear in life are because they are associated with death. People fear falling down because somehow that falling down might lead to death. People fear insects because these insects might cause some kind of a reaction which you might not be able to cope up with, and which may lead to your death. Or people fear different things which ultimately lead to their death, and therefore people have an innate fear of death, and therefore Browning gives death the name arch fear. Arch means the highest, the topmost fear. There he stands, the arch fear in a visible form. And not only, death is an abstraction, death doesn't exist in physical form, but the poet, the speaker here, gives death a physical form, because then it is easier to fight. If death does not have a physical form, you cannot fight with death. You cannot talk about a fight with death. So here death has a visible form, yet the strong man must go. Now the strong man must go. Where? Where must the strong man go? Should the strong man be going straight into the mouth of death? Or should the strong man be going to fight death and defeat death? Which is it possible? Very difficult to say. But the strong man must go. He considers himself a strong man is all we can take from this line. Considers himself a strong man and says that he must go, for the journey is done and the summit attained and the barriers fall. So the journey is done might mean the journey of life is done, the summit attained, whatever the person wanted to attain in life has been attained, and the barriers fall. So whatever barriers, whatever obstructions the person had been facing in life, they have all fallen down, or he has done something which has caused them to fall down. Though a battles to fight ere the guardian be gained. So a guardian would be reward. So the meaning of guardian is reward, and he says that before any reward, before you attain any reward, first you have to fight the battle, right? So though a battles to fight, ere means before, ere the guardian be gained, the reward of it all, I was ever a fighter, so one fight more, the best and the last. See, this is actually where you have a section ending completely, because this is where you get to understand that the poet or the speaker here is a fighter who is going to fight with death. You get to know for certain. And this entire journey towards death is a long and arduous journey with a lot of obstructions in between, and he has passed all the obstructions and he has finally come to the summit, and now he is ready to face death. And because he is a strong man, he will go like a fighter, because only then can he get a reward. But then you would wonder, what may be a reward after death? So this is where he goes further, that I was ever a fighter, so one fight more. This is the last fight, the best fight, and it's going to be the best fight. I would hate that death bandaged my eyes and forbore and had me creep past. So usually what happens in death is that this again goes back to some of the old practices, where after death the eyes are bound, the eyes are bandaged. So it is different in different cultures. In some cultures they put coins on the eyes. In some cultures they put some other material on the eyes. It may be wool, it may be flowers, it may be anything. But there is this this idea that something needs to be on the eyes. The eyes will be closed, they will be bandaged, which would remind you of the mummies whose eyes are bandaged, whose entire body is bandaged. So in a way they give in to death, and therefore their eyes are closed and they creep past death. So their death is not a soldier's death, it is a death in which you are just creeping past. So death is a person who is controlling everything. The moment you come close to death, death ties a bandage around your eyes. This fighter says, no, I will not have a bandage around my eyes by death. I will fight death. I'll let death do anything with me except tie me with a bandage. So moving on. No, let me taste the whole of it. See, he wants to taste the entire feeling of battling with death. Fair like my peers, the heroes of old. He considers himself to be close to, or a compeer. Peer means the friend of the heroes of old. So heroes of old would be the classical heroes that we have already talked about in the earlier videos, like Ulysses or Achilles or Hector. So like the heroes of old, he wants to taste death, and they went to Valhalla or the Happy Isles or these various other places, but he wants to do it himself. For him there is a Valhalla, for him there are these Happy Isles. So he wants to bear the brunt in a minute, pay glad life's arrears. So he wants to bear the brunt means, when we say brunt force, we mean the utmost forward force which comes in. So he wants to face death from the front, facing all of death's blows, tasting all of death's blows, and in a minute he would be glad to pay all the arrears, all of life's arrears. What is an arrear? An arrear is usually an amount of money that is given when you have some money to be paid and you want to pay that money together. So that is an arrears. So life's arrears is a metaphor in which, just like a person pays money which is left, I will be happy to pay anything that I have done in life. So He would gladly pay all the things that he has accumulated in his life just so that he can fight death and get his reward. Bear the brunt in a minute, pay glad life's arrears of pain, darkness, and cold. So, what are the arrears about? What are the things he wants to pay back? Darkness, cold, and pain. So, all the bad times, all the bad moments that he has had, all the moments that have caused him misery, he wants to give them all away and fight death. For sudden, the worst turns the best to the brave. Usually, this is something that even Francis Bacon discusses in his seminal essay called "Of Adversity," if I'm not wrong. So, in this essay of adversity, I'll make sure that there's a link to this essay below. He talks about how adversity brings the best out of us. Adversity is it means those conditions when we are not in our best, when we are facing a lot of difficulties. It is in these times of difficulties that the flower in us blooms, that we become pure and we are purged. So that's what he's saying here, that for sudden, the worst, whatever comes, which is worst, it turns the best people and makes them brave. So they were the best people and now they are the bravest of all people. The black minutes at end. See, black minute. A minute cannot be black. And again, a minute here is not a minute. So the minute means the moment, and black minute would mean the moment of death, where black denotes death. The color black has often been associated with night, with darkness, with death, with a sense of the unknown, because we do not know what is there inside a black hole once again. So the color black, it is associated with anything that we do not know about, anything that is uncertain. So the black minutes at an end, and the elements rage. Do you see again pathetic fallacy coming in? The elements are raging. What are the elements? The elements are the forces of nature. The forces of nature are raging. The fiend voices that rave shall dwindle, shall blend. So the fiend voices means the voices of the fiends or fiend-like voices. What is fiend? Fiend means a villain. Villain-like voices that are raving. So there are various voices coming from all around. Maybe the voices of the dead, maybe the voices of people who are fighting alongside, or maybe people who have been defeated by death. So they are raving, they are all crying out loud, and these all voices shall dwindle. Or maybe these fiend voices might be the voices of the living also. So here is an amazing example of how one phrase might mean two things which are completely opposite. It may mean the voices of the dead, it also may mean the voices of the living, because the poet is at the moment of death in this poem. So the poet is who is speaking this, the speaker in the poem is at the moment of death, and he's about to die, about to face death. And in this moment, he can hear a lot of voices. Reminds me of Kubla Khan again, but we'll not go into Kubla Khan now, where the river, you can hear the music on from both the sides. So all this music shall dwindle, shall blend. So it would all become the same. It would all start dwindling down. Shall change, shall become first a peace out of pain. So all the life full of pain will now become peaceful, because finally the black minute has come. Finally the journey is at an end. Then a light. Then there will be a light. Now this is where a bridge is made. So the speaker has transcended from the world of the living to the world beyond the living. So not even the world of dead, the world beyond the living, where he knows that there are some other souls present there. So just like Tennyson says in his poem Ulysses, that I'll go there and I'll go to the Achilles whom we miss. So he'll go to the happy isles where he'll meet Achilles, where he lay. And similarly, he will defeat death. The speaker in this poem will defeat death and go to that place beyond death where someone else is lying. Who is lying there? Then a light, then thy breast. See, who is thy? Because uh, death has never been addressed as you in this entire poem. Death has been addressed as death. Thy is the actual intended listener, and that listener is some lady on the other side, possibly Elizabeth Barrett Browning, if the speaker is Robert Browning. So, then thy breast. Your breast means I would embrace you. O thou soul of my soul. So you see, soul of my soul is a way of endearment. It is a way in which you call someone your own. O thou, O you soul of my soul, I shall clasp thee again. Clasp means hold, embrace, to, you know, pull someone tightly towards themselves. So I shall clasp thee again, I shall clasp you again, and with God be the rest. And everything, may it remain well with God. So it's again a way of saying that God will take care of the rest. I now have you. I have defeated death. I have come to you. So you see, this poem is actually not it is not, the subject itself is not positive, but the tone is optimistic. Death is not something that people attain to, but this speaker wants to go towards death, and he goes and defeats death. He doesn't bow down to death, he defeats death, and then he gets the reward, the guerdon of death. And that is what? Someone else. He reaches someone else. So this idea that if someone is dead and when you die you go to that person, this is very similar to what we find in Prospice. So the poet is Prospice to meet death. The poet, the speaker, is looking forward to meet death, to meet the person on the other side of death. So that is the poem Prospice for you people. I hope that I've been able to explain this to the best of my ability, and we'll see you again in the next video.